but I can record to the computer. So we'll do that,
Yes.
and then I'll send you the file afterwards.
Yes, that'd be great. We'll record this and then we'll upload it to the YouTube channel where everyone's asking for it, and we'll go from there. Thank you, Jon.
Cool.
I'll go on to mute and stop my video for now.
Thanks, Chris. I always find these webinar formats kind of funny because it's just me looking at myself talking. So what I would say is, like, feel free to chat in plenty if there are things you want me to talk about, or if otherwise I would have seen your reaction or you would have waved me down. I'll try to keep this pretty quick in terms of sort of the prepared stuff I wanted to walk through and talk through, and then hopefully we'll have good discussion and so on. So I've got some slides. There's not a lot of content on it, but it's good. It's maybe good as a backdrop for what we're trying to do. So I'll pull that up. All right, good stuff. So, you know, the context here is, obviously, I've been in the Google group for a long time. I started my company in 2015 after almost 5 years at Google, and the experience that many of you, have had over the last couple of weeks, I think, hit home as a Zoogler in a totally different way, as Chris and the community have talked about, and was trying to think about, you know, what are the different dimensions or frames of reference that maybe I had where I can be helpful, or maybe give people good push or good motivation and how they think about what's next. And I know it's a natural juncture for a lot of folks to say, hey, maybe I should start a company. Like, maybe that's the career opportunity I have next. And I think that's something that in my own experience has a lot of noise behind it. And it's really hard to get clear signal on it. How do I think through that? Is that a good idea? Is that not a good idea? You know, that kind of thing. And so I figured, you know, maybe I can be helpful and share some perspective, having taken my own leap out of Google to start a company, gone through my own ups and downs in terms of in and around layoffs within the company. And the relatability there, I would say, is, you know, one of the reasons I decided to cross out the after being laid off is I actually think that one of the kind of the catches here is I think that in many ways is very immaterial, other than the fact that it is the jolting part that makes you wonder whether starting a company is the right thing for you. And for different founders, that can happen at different times. You know, for me, I've told the story a million times, but I remember the first time I had a perf review in end of 2014, and my feedback was, you're doing a great job, and it's time for the other people on the adjacent teams next to you to learn more about what you're doing. And it kind of was this immediate light bulb of like, shit, I'm hitting a dead end here, and I've got to go do something else, because I don't want to be in the business of having to like broadcast my accomplishments, which is something that I can't see your faces. I know there's at least some eye rolls here from your own experiences. And so the relatability here is like, well, okay, well, what does it mean to take that leap, no matter what point you're leaping? And in many ways, I think the layoff is just sort of an acceleration to the end of the cliff. And so I thought, okay, maybe I'll give some thoughts and perspective on what I've seen be practical as you say, okay, should I be starting a company, and what should I be doing? So a little bit about me. What do I know about starting a company, other than the fact that I did one, or I had done that. I left in 2015. I was a PM for 1.5 years, as Chris alluded to. I had a really interesting journey at Google, in the sense that I started in sales and very quickly realized that I would have liked to have been a product manager, and that I should have studied CS or something closer to product. I navigated my way from sales to BD and sort of forced my transition into a product management role on what at the time was a very small Google surveys team, which became, you know, Google Consumer Surveys, which became surveys, and joined into analytics, I believe, after I left. You know, the interesting part of that is, and I think the relatable piece here is, I, even at Google, had a lot of experiences where I was sort of told I wasn't qualified for something. I wanted to be in the marketing program out of college and not sales, and I was told I wasn't qualified. I wanted to transfer into products out of sales, and I was told I wasn't ready to do that. Even when I went through the transition process of becoming a PM from BD, I was told I needed to be a business product manager and not an actual product manager, because I didn't have a CS degree. And the reason I share that is not to be self-congratulating, but rather to say, any of the preconceived notions you might have now as potential founders around who is qualified and is that for engineers or not, or PMs or not, is frankly bullshit, right? Like, it doesn't really matter what your background is, and I'll get into this in a few minutes. But the reality is that for most people, when you start a company, you don't know what you're doing. And what you're trying to figure out is, how do I absorb as much good direction and advice as possible to figure out how to take this leap if it's right for me. In the recent years, I've worked with a lot of people who've started companies, early stage, et cetera. And so most of what I'm sharing back is just stuff I've learned and felt in practice and been able to see be successful for others. What do I know about layoffs? I know a lot, and look, I won't liken my personal experience directly one-to-one with what many of you have gone through now in the last couple of weeks, and for those of you who were part of the layoff. But I did see my company go from 175 people to 25 in about a year. And so one of the big differences for that experience for me versus maybe what you might see with it, you know, through an executive at Google is, I interviewed and hired every single one of those people, right? I had a relationship with each one of them. So it hits in a different way. Never will it be the same for me as it is for the people who are now, in those situations left without a job. But the long and short of it is, we were going into 2020. We had raised a really big Series C. We were doing great. We had a big revenue target. And we were in the carpooling business. And so we literally made our business off of people going back and forth to the office. COVID hit that business really, really hard. We saw a 99% drop in usage and revenue within 10 days, and it never came back. We did a first layoff in April, right after COVID had hit. We navigated most of 2020 trying to figure out what to do. We got to the end of the year and realized we kind of needed to press a reset on the entire company. And so the key is, like, I've been through the experience of seeing people live through, what should I do next? Should I start a company? What job can I be? I mean, I still am in touch with a ton of the people that worked at Scoop. I have great relationships, thankfully, with a lot of our former employees. And I think we did the best job we could amidst a really difficult situation with layoffs. And I think there's been a lot of strength of character of the people on the team, or historically on the team, in terms of how they navigated their careers. Many of them were able to take that as an opportunity to sort of skip a step in the next stage of their career and use what happened at Scoop to get them a new job or transition into a new industry. And so I have sort of been close to that experience, and a lot of that also motivates my opinions on which of those people went to start companies, who thought about starting a company and decided not to, and so on. So that's a little bit about me. I can obviously tell more about Scoop, et cetera, or my backstory if that's helpful later, but I'm going to get into kind of the quick hitters here on the advice side, and we'll get to Q&A. So what is my advice for if you are thinking about, should I start my own company now that you're in this situation? Maybe you weren't laid off, maybe you're just thinking about starting your own company, or that's what brought you to the Zoogla Group in the first place. And then the key point here is, or choosing not to. One of the most important things I'll say up front is, this is meant to be a very deliberate decision. My biggest push of all is be deliberate, right? Do not try to wade your toes into the water of starting a company. It's a thing you need to sort of decide for yourself if you are ready to do, and do it with sort of full commitment one way or the other. And this is the advice of sort of how to go about that or think through it. First things first, sort of asked as a rhetorical question, is why do you want to start a company, right? If you're thinking about this, first things first, you need to be really clear-eyed on what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to grow in your skill set, and you think going in the deep end of being a founder is a good way to grow? Do you think you'll be more fulfilled making your own decisions? When I started Scoop, one of the reasons I did it is I just wanted to know if I was good at what I did. I thought I was a good PM. I didn't like the idea of having to sort of go through the ranks at Google, and I wanted to sort of live or die by my own decisions. Maybe you want to have a bigger impact. Maybe you want to just be a leader. Maybe you just want to make money. And if you do want to make the money, we can talk about the practicality of that. But the point is, the first question is practical. It is, what are you trying to start a company for? The second thing is, and this is what I tell anyone who I've ever spoken to about starting a company, and that is, the glamour of being a startup founder is, as I wrote here, misleading at best and probably total bullshit at worst. It is hard. It is not always that fun. It is really emotionally overwhelming. Most of the time, startup founders fail. And I think that if you're looking for the TechCrunch article glory, or the fact that you get to say you're a founder, that is a poor reason to start a company. I'm happy to tell you more about it. Getting into the more practical, another thing I would always encourage is, a lot of people spend a lot of time asking themselves, like, am I comfortable with the idea that I might fail, right? What happens if it doesn't work out? What will I do? Will I be okay with that? I actually think the bigger sort of risk or concern is, are you prepared for it to succeed? And what I mean by that is, a lot of people get into the idea of starting a company because they love the idea of being part of a small team and scrapping together a first product and the place and the excitement. But if you succeed, your startup becomes a company, and you need to hire people and manage people and handle HR and handle finance and grow your business and scale and all of these things. And I've met a lot of people where they start a company because they want the hustle and bustle of an early stage team. And then they get to 20 or 30 people and they're like, I never really thought about whether I would like this job, right? That's very different than starting, joining an early stage company and saying, hey, I'll be in this company until it hits 30 or 40 people and I'll go join another one. So that's that's one. And then the last piece is just that starting a company is an emotional roller coaster. It is the most emotionally turbulent thing I've ever done, and I've shared this exchange with anybody else I know who's a founder. And it just gets back to, like, if you want to start a company, you need to be prepared for something that's going to really try you emotionally, and really make you reflect on who you are and what you can handle and what you want to accomplish in your life, and what's important to you between work and personal. And so there's a lot here. I spent a lot of time on this first slide because at the end of the day, the first step for anyone who's thinking about this is, are you sure you even know why you want to do this, right? And have you really vetted that as a step before you even get further? So step two, you won't see this in a lot of places, and I don't know why, but I always try to remind people that you have to start with this after you've decided you even want to give it a go. And that is, are you financially prepared to start a company? And what I mean by that is literally, do you have enough money to be able to dedicate a significant amount of your time in a long stretch of time to trying to make your company work? You might make no money for a while. You might make not a lot of money, especially for a lot of you who worked at Google comparatively for a while. And you're already going to have enough pressure to be successful. But the last thing you want to do is feel like you need to go even faster because, oh, well, I've only budgeted for myself to have 3 months of money before I have to do something else. Well, that's not enough time. And so if you're adding another factor that's going to cause pressure, that's going to be really difficult for you. The key piece here, though, is it doesn't mean you have to have a lot of money, right? It just means you need to be comfortable living with whatever money you think you're going to have, right? Whether that means tapping savings or selling something or spending less or whatever it is, you just need to be eyes wide open. And if you ask me for an approximation, I'd say like, you should be prepared to make very little money for about a year. And then you'll maybe get a salary after you raise a seed round. But in your head, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to need to be successful, I need money coming in again, within 3 months or 6 months, that's going to be really hard. And the last part is, if tying this to like your partnership, if you have a romantic partner or someone you sort of share finances or life with, they have to be in on this decision just as much. The last thing you need to do is start a company, begrudgingly have a significant other that says, yeah, I'm on board. And then 2 months later, they're like, cool, well, where are we at economically, right? These are the practical concerns that if you don't deal with them head on, you're not going to have the chance to actually do the harder parts of actually figuring out how to build a company that can be successful. So number 3, right off the bat, you should start searching for a co-founder. And note here, I'm not talking about finding one, I'm talking about searching for one. And the idea is, my recommendation is you want to parallelize figuring out what it is you want to do with who you want to do it with, right? Maybe there are other people out there exploring ideas you want to interface with. Maybe you have ideas that you want to bring people into to interface with. The key is you need to start that conversation, because so much of finding a co-founder, if you don't already have somebody in mind, is about creating opportunities. You are looking for ways to have collisions, right? I say at the end here, it's like dating. You need to go out and date. You need to tell everybody, I want to start a company. I'm looking for a co-founder. Do you know anyone? Do you know anyone smart? Introduce me, right? You come tell me and you say, hey, John, I'm thinking about starting a company. I'd be open to a co-founder. This is the kind of person I think I might mesh with. I will immediately start thinking about who I can network you with and introduce you to. And it's going to be one conversation after another. Now, it would be easy for me to have put up a slide that says, it's great to have a co-founder that you know or have a relationship with or worked in the past. I think that's pretty obvious, but it's not always how this works. And so the biggest push I would give everyone is just start waving the flag and saying, hey, I am looking for someone. Don't stop doing the exploration on what it is you want to explore idea-wise, but constantly be trying to create those potential collisions to find the right person. And then as you're looking, I sort of would frame it as you're really looking for the 3 C's. Capability of that person, but more importantly, the compatibility and the complementarity. The secret to a good co-founder is you want to have as little overlap with that person as possible, in my opinion, so that together you create leverage for each other. Of all of the co-founding pairs where I've seen real problems, it's because they do the same thing. And they look at each other and say, wait, but I think I'm right on this topic. And you think you're right also. And so we're just going to argue and disagree on how to do it, versus saying, hey, 90% over here, I'm the expert, 90% over there, you're the expert, and we'll share the 10% in the middle. Right? And then also just compatibility, right? You're going to spend more time with this person than anyone else. So oftentimes I think people go out and they say, oh, I found a co-founder. They're this really brilliant engineer from so-and-so, or they're this excellent marketer that worked at this company. And they don't think about like, do I want to spend 10 hours a day with this person? And do together our skill sets make for a good whole? So 4, I'm about halfway through. Probably the most common thing I hear coming out of places like Google when people are wrestling with this decision is like, all right, but I'm not technical. So should I start a company? Can I start a company? First things first, do you want to start a technology company or a tech-enabled company? The truth is you can do either, but you should be clear-eyed on whether you need to be a technology company, meaning technology is the core IP and competitive advantage of what you're building, or whether you're trying to build a solution to something where tech makes it better, right? Are you trying to optimize an existing thing, a service business, et cetera? The reason I put this first is the core question is, that will influence who you need and what you need to do. If it's a tech-enabled company, you may be able to do low-code or no-code solutions for a while. If it's a technology company, yeah, then the fact that you're non-technical means you probably need to find someone who is technical, right? Don't go out and say you're going to build a new AI model, blah, 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 and be like, yeah, but I don't need a technical person. Well, you do, unless you're going to teach yourself to become a machine learning engineer. But just because you need a technical partner doesn't mean that you're not really important. Which brings me to the second part, which is like, excuse my language here, Chris, but are you fucking good at something specific? And can that be a differentiator in the business that you're doing? That could be you're a great leader, you're a good manager, you're a great fundraiser, you're a good operator, you're a great marketer. Doesn't really matter. But the number one thing is, what is the thing that you are really, really, really good at that somebody else is going to look at and say, damn, that's leverage for me, right? There's a company in Atlanta here that I'm working with that I've been close to. And more than anything else, if you ask me like, well, what is it about the founder that really, really strikes you? It's that everyone who talks to him is excited by what he talks about. Like the passion, the energy, the ability to communicate a vision, the ability to build relationships and network, et cetera, is his superpower. And that's a good enough superpower. And so we went out and we found him a CTO that was someone who really just wants to build shit, right? And that together they actually complement perfectly. That's where good pairings really happen and successfully. The other thing I'll point out here around technical skill set is for non-technical founders, the biggest concern is how do they get to an MVP? And for technical founders, the biggest concern is how do you not go above an MVP? Technical people overbuild and non-technical founders get stuck on how to create an MVP. What I would say is, if you're non-technical, the world for you today on your challenge is infinitely easier than it was 5 years ago. There are many, many, many ways to build an MVP. I was just reading an article yesterday around how Levels.fyi started by literally just building an MVP off of a Google form and a spreadsheet and some Zapier. My company literally just launched a new index repository yesterday on flexible and hybrid work requirements by company. And the back end is, and our MVP, and we have a 17-person engineering team, is a spreadsheet, right? A spreadsheet in a Webflow CMS. And so there's lots of ways to get over that hump to an MVP. And remember that on the other side, the technical folks, they're going to feel unrestrained. So you're coming at this problem from two different places, but they both matter. And then the last piece is, if you want to attract engineering talent, traction is the thing that people care about, right? Engineers who are talented want to build great stuff. And the exciting thing behind building great stuff is seeing that you're going to have users and interest and demand for what you're building. So if you want to be able to recruit or find or match up with a technical co-founder or a founding engineer or whatever, start making progress, right? Find a way to put together an MVP, right? When we started Scoop, I hacked up an absolutely embarrassing like JavaScript web app, and I was not an engineer, to get some people using it, and hired a friend of a friend out of a boot camp to make a mobile app. And then we torched all of it as soon as we actually had some success and decided that we were going to partner with an engineer or hire an engineer and start going. There are many ways to do that. If you want to be honest, if someone comes to me and says, I'm not technical, I don't know how to get an MVP together, or I don't know how to get started, that's my red flag. That we can't figure out how to put the right tools together to just get some people to react to what you're actually building. I see the question here. When I say MVP, I mean minimum viable product. And to use less jargon, I mean, what is the first thing that you can put in front of a potential user and have them say, cool, I would use this, or here's how I would like it, or how I would use it, or I like it, or I don't like it. Something that can do something very, very basic, where you can put it in front of the user and start to get feedback. That to me is sort of a basic idea of MVP. If you really want to get into the sort of the cornerstones here, just go buy The Lean Startup by Eric Ries and read that, and it'll get you at least thinking in this direction. My other, probably favorite topic in this is like, okay, well, I don't have a good enough idea to start a company. Most of the time, this is a euphemism for something else, right? It's, I'm afraid to, or I'm not sure, I don't want to take the risk. So I'll take the practical version of this question and say, okay, well, what if I don't have a good idea, right? What does that mean, right? What do I do? So the first thing is like, great companies do not come from like spontaneous epiphanies or like, oh, I took a shower and I just invented something and now I'm ready to start a company. They come from identifying a high importance area or high value problem, right? When I started Scoop and we wanted to build it out originally as a carpooling network, it just started from the idea that we were like, something about mobile transportation and mobility is at odds with the way we all still suffer in traffic. What can we do there? Like, what's the possibility? And then the way I was saying, it's just like, then start pulling the thread and just start pulling the thread and pulling the thread and pulling the thread. But most people get stuck on this idea of an idea because they think they're just going to wake up one day and invent something. Starting a company is not creating an invention. right? Like you're not building a better widget in most cases, unless you're starting a hardware company. And even still, it's really not the same. What you're doing is trying to understand a new way to deliver value or solve a problem that has not been solved before. And so be mindful of like, is the reason you say you don't have a good enough idea really because like, I'm scared, I'm nervous, I'm not sure I want to do this, I don't know what I'm excited about, etc. And then the other is just like ideas are cultivated. You have to nurture them and grow them. And oftentimes they're pretty bad at first, right? Or it's very common to have an idea, think it's amazing, and 3 days later, you're like, that's not a good idea at all. And I'll talk about this in a minute. And so how do you vet your ideas, right? And this is more science than art, which is why I share it. The first thing is like, all you should be doing is research. And that could mean Googling stuff or interviewing people or talking to people, but you just need to get as much opinion and feedback on that idea as possible, right? Keep just stress testing it, stretch it, pull it, squeeze it, chop it, whatever it is, like figure out what's beneath it. One of the strangest mistakes people make is they want to keep their idea like secret or do stealth mode. Just opinion of one person, but like that's all garbage, right? Like by default, if you're in stealth, you are hurting your ability to get input. And I think there's a lot of famous examples of stealth mode companies failing miserably when they come out because they just haven't had anybody actually look at their product, right? So just get out and get as much input and perspective as you possibly can on your idea and shape it and mold it and shape it and mold it. And for me, I've always thought of this as what my brother and I call the 6-week rule, which is you'll know you have something really interesting if you get to 6 weeks on a certain idea and you don't think it's stupid. Right? Now, there's some caveats and some biases here, which I'll talk about in a minute. But in general, what I found is rarely can someone come up with an idea, stress test it, talk to people about it, et cetera, and it get to 6 weeks, where after 6 weeks, if you still like it, it's not actually a good idea. Meaning, what I'm trying to say is if you can still like it after 6 weeks, it probably has long-term potential, right? Because 6 weeks is plenty of time to have a lot of reason to think that it's not worth working on anymore. And that evaluation should be simple. Is there an interesting market here or potential market here? And I'm not saying is it a $10 billion market or a $2 billion market in some TAM calculation. I'm saying like, is there something here that is really interesting either because it exists or it could exist? Second is there momentum behind that market or that problem? Are we moving with the wind or against the wind, right? And the third is, are you motivated to work on this problem? Right? I'll give you a funny example. One of the ideas we didn't start in 2015 2014 is for a little while we did some vetting on ironically enough mobile ordering and how do you order food from your phone at a table. Is it QR codes? Can you get rid of servers? Can it be automated, et cetera? And at the time we walked away from it because we interviewed a couple of restaurant owners and all of them were like that I wouldn't want that. I think it would hurt my restaurant experience. And we just immediately, it became very clear that like, we were not motivated enough to fight upstream in that challenge. Now, obviously things change. Look at what COVID did to the way we think about interactions and safety, and it changes user behavior. But in that moment, the mixture of sort of like anti-momentum and lack of motivation for us just said, yeah, we don't want to try to make this work. We don't want to be swimming upstream. And then the last part around vetting ideas is like, your goal is to eliminate bad ideas. You shouldn't be bummed out if after a week your idea obviously doesn't work anymore, or you don't think it's really worth it, or you're not motivated. You should be happy that you didn't accidentally start a company around that bad idea. And so remember, the whole goal is to get really good at saying, okay, what's an area I'm interested in? Cool, is there some novel solution or concept I have there? Research. Can I disprove it? Okay, I can't. Okay, great. Maybe I've got something here. So last two things here. The single biggest risk, in my opinion, for someone who has actually decided to start a company and is like off and running is falling victim to bias as they think about their idea or the solution of what they want to build. It is really easy to fall into the emotional swings and either feel seriously defeated by something you're hearing and over rotate on negative inputs, or have serious sunk cost fallacy and just be like, yeah, I'm not going to listen to this person. I'm sure I'm right. When I think about companies that have failed early, I mean, like gotten over the initial hump, but then 3 months in, 6 months in, 9 months in, they just don't ever get going. It's almost always because the person over rotated either on negative inputs or positive inputs, and was unwilling to sort of see it. And the reason why is, or my belief of what the reason why is, there's this archetype of a founder as a renegade, and people will bring up the old Steve Jobs quote of like, oh, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said a I don't remember what, it's like a bigger notepad or something like that, not a phone or what have you. And they laud this idea of like, oh, you're an innovator, you're an inventor, and people don't know, they don't understand. Yeah, but people aren't stupid, right? And so as a result, people end up over rotating on their own ideas, or they talk to one VC and they say, I wouldn't invest in this, and they say, oh, maybe I'm all wrong. I need to change up everything that I'm doing. And so the key is like, if you can stay objective and even and fight off the bias and just sort of be aware of what you're hearing, right, and guard against it, then you get a lot better outcomes. And so there's a typo here, I should say, keeping them in their lane. But the key here is like, as you're doing research, get what you can out of experts from within the area that they are experts. So what do users know about? Users know about their experience. They don't know if they would pay you for something. They don't know if your business is a good idea. If you interview people and the users are all like, yeah, this is great, I would pay for this, I would pay for this, don't assume that that means you're gonna have $1 billion idea if you don't vet out some of the business characteristics. You wanna talk to other founders, and this goes for this exact conversation, right? What do founders know? I know about being a founder. I've hired people, I've raised money, I've scaled a company, I've failed at times, I've succeeded at times. So I can give you good perspective on what I know, which is how to be a founder. But if you come to me and you say, hey, I'm thinking about starting a company in, I don't know, in like waste disposal manufacturing, I don't know shit about that. I will ask you questions like, what has the response from users been? Have you gotten, input from an early MVP? What have investors said? Have you thought about, your finances, that kind of stuff? But don't ask me to tell you if your idea is good, because I don't know anything about the space you're in. Similarly, industry experts are really good about knowing historical truth. They are experts on the industry today. They can tell you about trends and history, et cetera. They are particularly bad at prognosticating the future. So ask them about how the industry current works, but expect that if you're like, well, here's this idea on how I want to change it, they're probably not going to be there because they're not innovators themselves, they're industry experts. Last piece here is VCs. What do VCs really know about? They know about patterns. They like to invest in companies that look like other companies that they think can be successful. They like to invest in companies that other people seem to be investing in, or in trends that people seem to be investing in. And that doesn't mean that they're really, really smart. And that's why, it's hard to pick companies and it's hard to be a successful investor. And so if one VC says, I had a VC who actually invested in us, who insisted that Scoop was going to be challenged by autonomous vehicles 6 years ago. And that the biggest risk to us as a carpooling app is who would want to carpool when the cars were already driving themselves. And here we are in 2022 and we're not close, right? And so the point is, they all have their perspectives, they all have their own biases, but what they do know is they know patterns. And so if you talk to 10 VCs and they all say, look, I'm concerned about this part of your business, they're not dumb, right? Like they probably have some idea there of what's going on, which is a good transition into 2-7. So we actually had 8 and 9. We'll call this 7 star. Now, after you start about vetting and you've done research, et cetera, now you actually have to make that transition from idea to company, okay? And so if you're at that point, that's when you sort of need to change your gear a little bit and really understand that there is this moment when you go from, okay, I think I want to start a company, I've got some ideas, I'm doing research, this is all fun and games, I want to meet people, to like, okay, let's go. And at that point, it becomes, what am I trying to prove to myself and in general about this business? And how do I iterate through the learning cycle as fast as humanly possible, right? And so it's just sort of build, test, repeat, build, test, repeat, build, test, repeat, et cetera, and see where you got it right, where you get it wrong. And this goes back to the whole idea of feedback loops and building an MVP and just getting input. What I have seen a lot is that this transition goes too slowly. And you're like, well, we're still trying to figure it out. We're still testing it out. We're still thinking about it. And the answer is, at some point you need to say, okay, we think we have a good enough sense. Let's go. Let's get some people to try this thing out, or to give feedback on it, or build it, or give input, and start building and iterating something. And that's a pretty hard thing to flip on. I'm not going to go much deeper here, mostly because that's probably a better talk for like hey, I have an idea, like what do I do next? The last piece I will share, because I know it's such a hot topic for folks, is, okay, well, what about raising money? I could give a whole other talk on this. I have in the past, but I'll give you the cliff notes, which is like, when you get to the point where you're like, I think I have a thing that I'm motivated to work on. I think it's an interesting market. I have a novel solution. I'm starting to get user inputs, and you're thinking about fundraising. What does that mean? Or what should you do? This is the fundraising advice I give to everyone I ever talk to. First, fundraising is a science, not an art. Go ask 10 founders how they raise money, and they will generally tell you the same thing. You need to line up investors, schedule meetings in a quick succession, go make your best pitch, try to get somebody interested and build competition, and go. Like, that is it. There is no secret novel, oh, well, investors don't understand my business, I've got to do this special thing. 98% of the time, you're going to fundraise the same way everybody else did, which is go out, schedule meetings, get a lot of no's, find a couple yeses, and move on. Second piece is, with investors, you want to be building relationships early. Even before you have a product, before you get out there, ask for introductions, try to meet people, go and ask, the old adage is if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. Go out and ask for advice. Ask investors to give you input on who's great in this space. What have you seen work really well? What are their best, what's their best advice? What are their concerns? Don't over rotate on the advice, but start to build a relationship and show yourself as someone who's smart and thoughtful and wants to learn. The whole goal of that is to be able to draw lines and not dots. And so what do I mean by that? And this is the single best piece of fundraising advice that we ever got, which is, you show me a dot on a plot, I don't know what the fuck that means. I don't know what that means you were at before. I don't know if I can project where that's going to go forward. If you can show me how you progress from dot to dot, now I'm starting to build an idea of what you're able to get done. So what does that mean? That means meet me in January, tell me about what you're doing, meet me again in March, and show me what you did. You went from no product to an MVP. You went from 10 test users to 30 test users. You said you were going to leave your job and then you left your job, right? You said you were going to find a co-founder and then you did it. VCs in a seed stage, early stage, they want to see that you can deliver. That's all they're trying to really bet on. We raised our seed round 10 days after I left Google. And the reason why was we raised it from the investors we met in November when we were testing our pilot, which was 2.5 months earlier. And we said, we're going to do a pilot. It's going to work. We're going to leave our jobs, and then we're going to raise money and hire a team. And we did all of those things. And so we came back in January and said, hey, we did it all. And they said, great, we now know you can execute and do what you say you're going to do. The next part is VCs are on a pedestal, right? Like we all get in our heads about it. There's 1 million investors now. Some are good, some are not. They're not perfect, but they're not dumb, right? If they keep telling you the same thing, take it to heart. Don't be a renegade. And ultimately realize that certain investors will get what you're doing and certain won't, right? We used to talk to, I don't know, we probably had 50 different investors over the course of Scoop's history as a carpooling company that said, oh yeah, Uber's going to do carpooling, right? We had other investors said, oh, carpooling's not cool. So you just got to sift through it and realize that they're good at pattern matching, but you also have to talk to the right people. And then the last part is with fundraising, momentum is everything. You just got to build momentum in the relationship and what you're doing in the process. Slowness kills all deals, and the slower you show that you're able to progress things, even in terms of conversation with them, just the less energy they have around it. And momentum is the key to really building success here. And so, I think we've covered a massive scope of stuff here. This is meant to be cliff notes to sort of whet the appetite and dive deeper. I hope this is helpful. And we've got a good chunk of time for Q&A, which is great. So, fire away anything I talked about. Ask about it. If you got other stuff, I'm happy to talk about whatever. And hopefully my speed here wasn't too rapid. I know I could talk fast, but
Thank you,
whatever.
Jon.
It covers a lot.
I think people who find it too fast, they can slow it down when they watch the recording. So perfect that we have a lot of questions.
I need to tell my wife that next time she tells me I'm going too fast.
So do you want to click on the Dory as well, and we can go through some of the questions, and folks feel free to start upvoting. The first one is, what are the most common mistakes that first-time founders make?
Let me open the story as I go. Here we go. So look, I don't know if I know what the most common ones are. I can tell you what I think the most common ones are that I see. I think so things that I think really mess people up along the way in different regards. One, really falling victim to the bias. I'll repeat that point from before, right? I would say the most common version of that is confirmation bias. It's just being so convinced that you know something that everybody else doesn't, that you get in this mindset of, I'm a founder and I'm inventing something and I'm breaking new ground and this investor doesn't know anything and whatever. And rarely does that actually turn out to work well, because you need investors to invest in you and you need people to believe in you. And if you just always think you know something everybody else doesn't know, you at least need to figure out how to translate that into something that they can digest and embrace. That's one. Two is not finding a co-founder, to be honest. I don't think I've ever met anyone who started a company by themselves and it worked. It does happen, but it is unusual and it is really hard. My strongest advice is just don't do it. It's not worth it. And then I think the third is terms of mistakes, I think the third is not understanding what it means to try to rush to an MVP, right? You got to get something out in front of users quickly. And so I would say it's the company where you're like, hey, it's been, actually, I'll give this example of a company I'm working with, again, here in Atlanta. They spent like January through August of this year, they're non-technical, they had one agency building the website and another group kind of hacking on a first MVP, and they're making a lot of networking relationships and felt like they were making progress. But then when I kind of got involved with them, I was kind of like, all right, well, what do you have? And it's like, we got nothing. We don't have any users touching our product. We're not getting any feedback on it. We've got a lot of people excited about a concept. And I was just like, look, you guys need to start getting shit in front of people as soon as humanly possible, because you can get stuck in this moment of like, oh, I feel like we're making progress. We're having these conversations. I feel good, but ultimately you're not actually seeing if anything works. And then there becomes this really scary moment of like, well, when do I actually pull off the Band-Aid and see if it works? So that's the third piece. Let's say the next one is, how do you go about exploring an idea when you have no technical background and no technical co-founder? Yeah, good idea. So there's two differences between like researching and exploring, and then like getting an MVP and getting user feedback. So when you go into research and exploring, that is not, unless it is an inherently technical concept, for most businesses, that is just about talking to people and understanding the problem domain better than anybody else. Like if you're going to be successful as a founder, you almost certainly are going to end up knowing more about the topic that you're working on than 99.9% of all other human beings. So I'll give you an example. When we pivoted at Scoop, we pivoted out of carpooling and into hybrid work. And so I made it my business to talk to more people who were working in a hybrid environment or putting in place a hybrid work plan or whatever than anybody else around me. And so I just talk to people all the time. Talk. And that has nothing to do with being technical or non-technical. It has to do with the fact that like I wanted to understand this space as much or better than any other person alive and know what people are doing, how are they feeling, what's working, what's not working, how are customers feeling about it, reading every article, and you just have to obsess over the problem. My brother and I often talk about second companies. And there are certain companies where you just sort of say, that's not the kind of company a first-time founder can start. And most of the time, it is because the second-time company is dealing with a topic where the person who started it was able to do a tremendous amount of research with the right people in a way that only someone who's gone through the failures of not doing research first time. So a good example of that is we had a company, it's actually a Zoogler, who started their second company was really their third company was in the big data space for oncology data. And they didn't know anything about any of this. They never did biotech. They had never done anything in oncology. They had never done anything with pharmacies and hospitals, et cetera. And so they just spent 8 months talking to every single human being they could about how they dealt with oncological data. They talked to cancer doctors, pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, insurers, everybody, and then they found the common thread of what the challenge was there, and they built a product to solve that problem. And that had nothing to do with being technical, it had nothing to do with being a medical expert. It just has to do with being able to dig.
How do you go about exploring an idea when you have no technical background and no technical founder?
Yeah, so I think that's similar to what we were just talking about. I think that's the one I was trying to answer at. But in terms of like second piece of that, maybe I'll get into, which is like, all right, well, how do you vet? How do you like? So now you have a concept, but you're still non-technical, and you're like, okay, I really understand. I don't know, how to dispose of cardboard boxes at people's houses, right? But I'm not a hardware engineer and I'm not a software engineer, so I don't know how to build an app that someone's get whatever. There are plenty of tools out there to get a very shitty basic version of your app together or your product together to get someone to look at it. And like, I hate to be coy about it, but in today's world in 2022, that is the answer, right? You can use a spreadsheet and Zapier and whatever and Webflow to build basically anything. Or there's many different versions of no-code tools that are better. I think the key is people misconstrue how do I build my product from how do I build my prototype. Mm-hmm. Building a prototype is all you're talking about doing, something that someone can play with, bugs and all. You're not looking to build something that people want to give you money for and start using and scale overnight. You're looking to give somebody something that they can say, cool, I would use this, or here's how I would use it, or this would work, or even just starting to get a little bit of stuff there. Like, if you are a non-technical person who feels stuck because you cannot figure out how to build a MVP, your bigger challenge is about how to think about building stuff and not the technical piece. In which case you should ask somebody for some advice on like, what would an MVP look like to you? Or just literally go read the Lean Startup.
And literally for people who are on this live or even watching it very recently, when we posted this, today's the February 8th, a lot of people on the Zoogle Slack right now, more than it's ever been before. I'm sure there'll be someone there who can help you think through technical problems or how to think about the product without actually building a technical product. So let's actually go through a question that's related to this. Sam's asking about, he sees a lot of interesting problem spaces. What are some strategies to decide what to work on? Sort of relates to what you're saying, perhaps work on a problem for 6 weeks and go back to it later. How would you sort of answer this question?
Yeah, so the first thing actually about like finding a problem space and what to work on, in my opinion, starts with understanding in what way you are motivated. So I have this general rule of thumb that like people tend to be motivated in one of two sort of classes of ways. There are some people who can only be motivated if they are truly passionate about a topic. Right? When I was working on Google surveys, I had a coworker. She's been phenomenally successful since Google. And she hit a wall on surveys and basically just sort of said, market research does not interest me. Like I know what we're doing is cool. And I know that the space is interesting, but like, I care about like these three things. One of them was women's health and fertility, which is where she's made her career. And she kind of just realized like, I need to work on one of the things I'm passionate about, or I'm not going to do good work. If you're in that category, you can only start a company in an area that you're passionate about. So write down the things that you would want to spend 80, 90, 100 hours a week working on for the first year and go work on one of those and don't cheat yourself. If you're in the other group, then you're generally one of those people that is interested in a problem or any space or anything can pique your interest as long as it's interesting enough or cool enough or important enough. I fall in that category. That's why I've worked on research and carpooling and hybrid work, is I just like interesting problems and challenging concepts. If you're in that category, literally you have the luxury of saying, okay, what are interesting things in the world that I think are cool or worth exploring? And what I would start by doing is just think about like, you know, what Paul Graham always says, although I don't love a lot of what he says, what I do like is like, think about the problems you have in your own life, right? Why do I use the cardboard disposal as my example? Because I fucking hate wiping down my cardboard boxes once a week. And then I wish that I could invent some like spray that would make it disappear, right? So, but in practical terms, like think about things that cause you challenges or that cause other people challenges and just start pulling on that thread, or go read articles around what are challenges in the world, what are things that are happening, what are trends you see, and just start digging. And then you'll find that the more you have conversations about that stuff, you'll be able to make progress. One of the things I would say is not knowing how to dig for ideas is a good microcosm of how are you able to learn and figure out new things, which is all that being a founder is. It's just constantly learning how to do new stuff. Like a great example, I'll use Chris as my example. His whole thing that he worked on for the last however 7, 8 years doubled in size in 2 weeks. Nothing could have prepared him for that other than the fact that all he's done over the last 7 years is figure out how to learn and adapt and learn and adapt and learn and adapt. And so exploring ideas and digging is just the first version of, as the founder, you've got to learn and adapt. How do I do research? How do I ask people about their problems? How do I reflect on my own problems? Like that is the getting started problem. And so to some degree, like that's the thing you've got to kind of just jump into and try to start to figure out how to do.
And it's not even a business yet, 7, 8 years later. So if anyone has ideas, let me know. So let's talk about some questions, talk about side hustles to an actual business and how should they really focus on what they really love doing and not to over-index on things that perhaps is very, very busy. I guess it's more about a passion play versus a business that they can launch to perhaps cover the expenses, right? That's probably where the question is.
Yeah, I don't do this often, and Chris, you know this, but like, I don't know anything about side hustles. None of the advice I've given, nothing I've talked about is about anything other than like vetting and exploring what a full-time job would look like. If you're thinking about like, how do I build a SaaS company on the side that can sort of pay my bills or whatever, that I'm there, that's a perfectly valid idea. I think it's a smart thing to pursue, but I don't know shit about it. And so I can talk to you about vetting ideas while you're in another job, because that's what I did while I was at Google. And really all that has to do with is like, how do you do research and get yourself to a point where you're confident enough to start a company? So if some of you don't pass the financial part of what I said and say, hey, I'm not ready, I need to bank more money, then yes, one thing you can consider is in your nights and weekends, how do you vet an idea and what do you do? And the answer to that is actually pretty cut and dry. Use your nights and weekends and do as much research as you can and do the math and the planning to say, okay, at this point is when I'm going to jump. For me, it took us, we did about 7 months of work while we were still at our jobs before we started Scoop. We launched a pilot while we were still working. I was literally working all night and all weekend while I was at Google and still doing my job well. And we said, if the pilot goes well, we will stop what we're doing, we'll quit our jobs, and we will start the company full time. So we had a clear like line of demarcation. A lot of people get stuck in that, I'm not ready, I'll keep staying. And 3, 4, 5 years later, they're still in their core job. That's what it means to incubate an idea before you go full time. That is different than a side hustle where you have no intention on making it your full-time gig. I don't know anything about that.
So let's go deep on what you just mentioned. Now, it's a question was asking how to get themselves organized while being employed. You did mention clearly nights, weekends, but other specific tactics you can share, and what was the plan and how did you hold yourself accountable?
So I want to make sure I don't see the question in the door, so I want to make sure I understand it fully. So you're talking about when you say getting yourself organized, like what's the context of the question?
So it's the second last question that's been submitted, but it was related to some of the things. So it's talking about how you would actually organize executing what you did, right? In terms of how do you make sure you cleared your schedule? How do you make sure you gave yourself perhaps the time to plan, to make sure you hit those milestones?
Yeah, so it's a good, interesting analogy to being an athlete. So one thing that comes up here is there is this sort of subtle undertone of like, I mentioned 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And one thing I should note is like, I have 3 children. I've had all 3 of them while I was at Scoop. I take my kids to school every day. I have dinner with my family every night. I probably work between 50 and 60, 50, 70 hours a week on like actual like front of computer work. So I am in balance. Like I am not for the 100-hour work weeks. I am not for the stop your personal life. Like I don't believe in that. I think it's actually probably generally a negative thing on being a founder. That said, whether you like it or not, there is some piece of flying this plane that requires you to turn the engine on and go really, really, really fast down the runway. And like, then when you get up in the air, you can turn the engine off or whatever it is, right? But there is a piece of this where you've got to build momentum to get some type of air off the ground. And generally speaking, that literally is just going to require you to work more hours because there's nobody else to do anything. And so it's not a grind and hustle. There is more work than you can do in a normal week of work. Now I have a team, I have people, I have other things who can do stuff. So part of it is just realizing that when you talk about getting yourself organized, I would try to take it from a much more logical brain perspective, which is that like, in order to vet an idea or get started on any activity in your life, there's some amount of things you need to do and some amount of time that takes. If you have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you're already working 8 hours a day in a full-time job, then getting organized is saying, what is on my to-do list and when am I going to find the time to do it? And progress will happen as fast and efficiently as you're able to complete things on your checklist relative to the time. It's not much more complicated than that. So when I talk about I was doing every night and weekend, it was because week 1, mock out the requirements of the product. Week 2, work with the app designer to start doing V1. Like week 3, do QA. Like it's literally just checking off a to-do list like you would in your normal job, but knowing that your to-do list is going to just perpetually increase. Like there is no done, there is no flex, there is nobody else. And that's where the rub really comes from, is that how fast do you want to go, right? If you don't want to do nights and weekends and you just want to do nights, so do nights, and you might have to do it for 6 months instead of 3 months before you can leave your job, that kind of thing. I don't know, maybe that answers the question.
One of the questions about people who may not be a product or engineer, right? What advice do you have for people from marketing, designing backgrounds to be a co-founder? Where do they fit in terms of starting a company or being a co-founder?
Yeah, so look, I think the first thing is there's a very big difference between being an engineer and being a product person in terms of like, what does that mean? Product is a skill. I believe it's a skill. It's like my core job, but it's a skill in a different regard because there's no, sorry, letting the dog out. There's no like technical foundation. There's no academic, I need to go to school and learn this thing and either I know it or I don't, right? And so the first thing is like, my general advice is today, if you're trying to figure out, well, I'm not an engineer, what do I do? The biggest gap you need to solve between yourself and being an engineer is the ability to build a prototype. Full stop. That's it. You are not going to be the technical leader of your company if you are not an engineer already, unless you want to go spend 1.5 to 3 years learning how to at least be a basically good engineer. And by the way, you're still not going to be the CTO that you want because you want the CTO or the engineering leader to have much more experience than your 1.5. The value that you might have is building a prototype. So the answer is like, if you're asking as a marketer, how do I make up the gap of not having a technical co-founder and being technical? Limit it to the scope of like, can I build a well thought out prototype? That's one. Two, okay, well, how do you close the gap on what a product person knows versus what you know? Well, what makes a really good product manager? Like, first, go read a few articles. Now, if you're asking me on the fly, it's like, do you understand user problems? Do you know how to minimize those problems to the most important functionality? Do you know how to scope and prioritize and do user research and get feedback? If you can learn those things, you can start to take shape on a good product. Anybody can do that, and you don't need to be the product person necessarily, but you need to learn how to use those skills fast enough to be able to apply it to an MVP so that users will say, hey, this might be something I'm interested in, right? And then lastly, if you're a marketer, you better be really fucking good at that part, right? Your positioning messaging should be great. The language that you use, the way you write emails, like you should be able to do all the things that the engineering leader cannot do and do them really, really, really nicely to solve some of those problems. And so you should flex that muscle. But one of the things about being a founder is you're going to need to be good enough at a lot of things, right? A lot of things. And so people always get caught up on being great at something. You are not trying to build the product that's going to be there forever as an engineer. You are not trying to be the product decision maker on everything that will ever happen. You just need to have two things. One is the ability to learn new stuff. And two, you need to understand the space you are trying to solve for better than everybody else alive. That's it.
I'm going to pull these different questions together to sort of summarize. How does someone market themselves to be a good co-founder? Because some people who is a technical co-founder trying to find a product person trying to be technical. Some may be trying to say, I have these strengths, I don't have other these strengths. Like, how should someone, whatever backgrounds they have, position themselves as the best partner for potential co-founder?
Yeah, so I'm assuming that question comes from the place of like, if somebody else is working on something and you want to present yourself as someone who can join them and help them. The best way to present yourself as the best co-founder is to start by really having a clear understanding of the actual answer to the question, which is, what is it that you are capable of doing that is going to be a differentiated value add or point of leverage or complementary skill set that is going to meaningfully increase the chance of this venture succeeding, right? 10 years ago, this was the like, well, you're a non-technical co-founder who wants to hire me to build your app. Like, what are you bringing to the table? And the answer is like, you better be bringing how to market a product, sell a product, find investors, find customers, et cetera. Like a lot of the questions that are on the door even around how they kind of get started. If you're not writing the code, you sure as hell better have the moxie and aptitude for learning to be able to figure out all of these other things that are mostly grit oriented, right? Like, and yes, it may be as simple as saying, you should be able to go spend 5 hours reading about how to find your first customer and then do it. Right. And that's really where your skill set, your interpersonal skill set, your ability to communicate ideas, your ability to be operationally efficient. One thing that non-technical people miss, and I'm mostly aiming this at non-technical folks, because I don't think there's a lot of engineers trying to figure out how to sell themselves to non-engineers. It just doesn't happen as much, although I can answer that question too, is like, if you are a non-technical person and you have a marketing background, a sales background, an operations background, you write docs better than most engineering counterparts. You use Excel better than most engineering counterparts. You think through communication challenges. You write email. Like your entire job is different than their entire job. And so you do a lot of stuff that they don't want to do and don't know how to do. And the best thing you can do is be able to communicate. These are the things that I'm really excellent at. And by the way, just like any other job, the best way to communicate what you're excellent at is tell them what you've done in the past, right? If you launched some product or you help scale some team or manage some group, like those are really good skill sets. I think the biggest mistake that non-technical folks make is they don't have the confidence going in that they believe that they could do something valuable here, which comes back to some weird, deeply entrenched tech misnomer of the fact that like non-technical co-founders are somehow not that valuable, when most of the more successful companies in the last decade have been started by non-technical people, or at least in part by non-technical people. And so, yeah, I have a lot more on this topic just because it hits home for me. And I remember being nervous about finding an engineer. We had one, I'm sorry, I can't help but tell the story. We had one investor who turned us down in our seed stage. And the reason why is he looked at me and he says, oh, you worked at Google and you worked with really good engineers. You'll never be able to hire good engineers like you worked with at Google. And so you just won't be able to build a good product. And that is seared into my brain. Right? Because the answer is, and then I interviewed 70 engineers over the next 12 weeks and I hired 4 and we had a founding team and we got after it. So some of this is as simple as like, just go fucking do it, right? And there's a lot of literature and a lot of tooling out there today to make it easier. And maybe that's not the most actionable advice, but sometimes that really is as simple as it gets.
Do you have extra time, or do you need to run in 2 minutes?
Sure. Yeah, let's go. I'll give you a couple more minutes.
Yeah, let's keep going. So let's start from the top. How did you acquire your first customer?
So it's different. It was different with Scoop Carpool than it was with Scoop Hybrid. With Scoop Carpool, we had built a relationship with Workday. There's good articles on this out there. We had met this woman at Workday. We had started to learn about her problem in transportation, and they were struggling because they were based in Pleasanton, and people in California, which is, for those of you not in California, it's about an hour east of San Francisco. The BART train went there, but it wasn't super convenient. They were having some issues with employee sync. So we started by understanding her problem. We met her in June of 2014. We kept talking to her. We helped her do an employee survey. We built a relationship. We showed her that we understood what she was doing. And then when we were ready to start to get to a pilot on something, we said, will you pilot with us? Like, will you be the one who rolls this out and test it out for us? And she said, yes. And so the answer is, like, we cultivated a relationship by finding the person who had the problem and bringing a version to them that they could try out. And then she helped us figure out how to communicate it to the employees and give it a shot. We did the same thing when we built the workplace side of our hybrid product. And we just started talking to customers and asking them for research and asking for feedback. And eventually one of them says, hey, I'd love to try whatever you're working on, right? And you talk to people, right? Like, the research phase can become the customer discovery phase very quickly, right? And typically is the best way to do it. It goes back to if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money. With customers, a lot of the time with early customers, it's, if you want customers, do research. And if you want research, try to sell a customer, right? In terms of like what you get. And then with the version of Scoop we have today, which is sort of product led and more bottoms up, it's grit and grind within your network. Hey, will you try this out? Will you do this for your team? I could really use your help, and just do whatever it takes to get some eyeballs on the product. And that can be a slow grind, but you gotta just sort of, you gotta ask.
So what are good ways to start building a customer base for both B2C and B2B companies?
Yeah, so in some ways I will push back on the question, because building a customer base is only something that you should be worried about or sort of deserve to worry about once you have a core group of customers who like your product. One of the big mistakes that people make as they start to grow or see some success is, instead of saying, how do I get my 10 customers to go from liking my product to loving my product, they say, how do I get my 10 customers to go to 20 customers? Now, it's not always so mutually exclusive, and obviously investors and money and all this other stuff comes into play. But in general, a unit of energy put into making the product more awesome for existing users is going to be more valuable than a unit of energy trying to get the next user, largely because in many business models, your next user is going to be easier to get if your current users are happier, right? Those two things go hand in hand, either because the product speaks their language better, or you learn more how to talk about the value, or you get a case study or an introduction if you want to get more practical. So when you're thinking about how to build B2B base, my best advice tactically of like, how do you get started with your B2B customers is do research. Just ask people for feedback, do research, use LinkedIn, ask for connections, say, hey, person, I'd really love to get your input. You would be amazed in general how much people are willing to tell you about their problems. If you want to reach out to people and say, hey, will you just spend 20 minutes talking to me about whatever? They will usually do it. If you say, hey, will you try my product? They will usually not, right? Like, people want to tell you what they have to say. They don't want to be sold to. And so if you want to build a B2B customer base, that's it. If you're talking about the B2C side, or the PLG, maybe more like SaaS bottoms up side, two thoughts. One is start with your own network, your own friends, the people you know, et cetera. And the other is, honestly, there is so much good literature out there on how to find watering holes and where people are talking about your problem and how to break into a network and how to ask people to try stuff, that I'm not going to do it a good service. Go read the PLG book, or go listen to Lenny's podcasts, or there's plenty of materials out there to help you understand, like, how do you find the niche group of people who are going to wedge in and start to use your product.
Awesome. Let's talk about some more technical stuff. Can you talk about specifics like registering an LLC, finding a lawyer? What are good tools? What would you recommend people to do? Finding a VC raising around?
Some stuff, yes. Some stuff, no. So the funny thing here is, like, I run product engineering at Scoop. My brother is a Bain background and does all kind of the business side, so the operations, finance, et cetera. So some of this stuff is in his wheelhouse. And so, like, my first advice is, it goes back to complementarity. Like, that was stuff I am less interested in and less knowledge about, so he did it. To be a little more practical, most how do I questions in early stage all should start with asking your network. The Zooglor network is a great place. Like if you need a lawyer, if you need a corporate lawyer, I work with what I believe is the best corporate lawyer alive. So I will introduce you. If you need to register an LLC, there's actually a product for this. There's a SaaS who did this. I can't remember what it's called. You might remember, Chris. It's like some tool where you type in some shit and they give you an LLC in Delaware and the whole thing is in, et cetera. Although you're not really setting up an LLC, you're probably going to want to set up a C Corp. So find that lawyer before you incorporate. You do not want to set up an LLC if you're trying to start a tech company. Google that. And so ask people what they did. When it comes to finding a VC, raising a round, et cetera, now I'll get really tactical. There's plenty of literature out there to do research on who has funded companies that look like yours, what are their mandates, who are the best investors, et cetera. Start building a list. We did this. We had a 60 VC spreadsheet. We talked about who they'd invested. It said who they invested in, who their lead partners were, what their domain of expertise was, what our best connection was. We literally mapped out a grid of what is our plan of attack on each VC. We removed people who didn't do our scope of work. We removed people we didn't like. We removed people we didn't have a good connection to. We tiered it out. And then we said, okay, now we want to start going. And we want to start reaching out. We reached out to everybody that we were in our first tier. We say, hey, we're going to raise money for this thing. Meeting. We scheduled 30, I think it was 30 meetings in the first 3 weeks. We got through 15, we raised our seed round. That was the end of it, right? And so all of that goes back to research and network, right? Like one of the things I've always joked about as a founder is, if there is anything that a founder is going to be willing to do for you, it is introduce you to VCs if your idea is good. Nothing gives us more prideful satisfaction than saying, hey, VC, I have this awesome new company for you because I'm awesome and I'm plugged in and I'm smart and I know all these great people. Let me tee it up for you. If someone will not do that, if a founder will not introduce you to a VC, your immediate thing should be like, hey, what's wrong with what I'm doing? That is as red a flag as it gets. If you come to me with a genuinely good idea, I will definitely introduce you to a VC if I have the relationship, if not try to invest first. So if you go to another founder who's been successful, who knows the VC, and they're like, yeah, if I can make that intro, that is like a bright fucking red flag that there is something about what you're doing that they don't want to vouch for. And so I would just immediately be like, hey, what is it? What's not working here? Negotiating salary is not a thing with VCs. There's benchmark data for that. So once you raise a round, you go pull the benchmarks on what seed stage founders are paid and pay yourself that. Happy to talk about that offline if you ever have questions. If you want to talk about company failures, I can tell you all about that, but that's probably good for just DM me in the Zooglor chat. I'll tell you about it.
So this question's, I want to rephrase this question. They're asking about how to protect their IP without any funding to protect their IP. Can you talk more about how protective?
What IP do you have? 99% of the time, this is not real. I'm sorry to give such a trite answer, but like, people don't steal ideas. The reason why the whole thing about Facebook was such a big deal that they made a movie about it is because it's such an unusual case. Right? It doesn't really happen that way. You don't have IP if you just wrote a widget or a code that does something. There's probably somebody else there that's done it. If I think about Scoop today, even this version of Scoop that was just born out of Hybrid, there's like 15 other companies that do some version of what we do. I think not as well. Why do I think not as well? Because it's not the user experience that I think is ideal or the solution that I think needs to come together. And so if you find yourself worrying about IP and protection of your idea and that kind of stuff early on, something's probably not lined up in terms of what you're trying to accomplish, right? Unless you've truly invented something that you need to get a patent for, which I don't think I've ever come across in like a beginning seed stage startup. But like, if you want to kill a fundraising deal, like send a VC an NDA and they'll tell you to fuck off. Like, it's just not, they're not going to do it. But don't be dumb about that, which means every time you send materials to a VC, you should assume that somebody else in the space is probably going to get those materials. We get fundraising decks and inside information around, not insider, but inside information about other folks fundraising all the time. And if your business is good, it won't matter.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Jennifer's question, because a few people may have the same thinking, right? They want to do something impactful, but this seems like more like a nonprofit. Maybe they could actually put some business revenue models behind it. How should someone really think about brainstorming the ideas and perhaps even thinking about that?
So the biggest thing about nonprofit versus profit is about motivation model. It's not about business model. Nonprofits make money. They bring in money. They just don't return profit to shareholders. They put the money back into the charity or into the organization. By the way, executives and nonprofits make a lot of money, right? Like, go look at hospitals. Nonprofit hospitals are substantially more valuable and profitable than for-profit hospitals. They just put all the funds back into the hospital and into the executive team of the hospital, right? And so the first things first is, like, if you're trying to figure out if it's a nonprofit or if it's a for-profit, you're first asking yourself, what is the number one motivation of this business? Is it to return shareholder value? In which case, at each decision, we will need to ask ourselves, is this going to be best for shareholder value of returning wealth? And therefore, should we do A or B, knowing that we ultimately have a price to pay? Or is ultimately the goal to refund or recycle funds back into the organization, where what is good for the cause can theoretically be the North Star? Those are just two totally different business outcomes. Like, nonprofits are never you're gonna sell your nonprofit and have like an equity outcome. You might just make a lot of good money. Maybe the happy medium is like a B Corp, although B Corps are really just for-profit companies that maybe are trying to acknowledge the fact that they're like a little more altruistic and more moral or principled. Like, they don't really make that big of a difference in terms of like how the economics work out. And so I think the first question is, like, do you want to start an organization that like serves the needs of some underserved group and creates a smart business model? Because, by the way, nonprofits need a good business model. They need to make money. They need to bring revenue in to pay for the business or be able to fundraise to offset the business. Or do you want to create a for-profit business that helps the world, right? Like, in theory, any clean tech company is a really good example of a for-profit business and business sector that is doing something that's really good for the world. Anything in biotech, unless it's pharma necessarily, anything in clean tech, anything in mental health, like, you can do all those things and serve good missions, but be profitable. And that's just a completely different type of business than a nonprofit, which is going to be run off of fundraising and charitable donations and recycle funds and things like that.
Since we're in this line of thinking, the question below is talking about the idea is predicated on a physical location that requires people to experience. For example, SoulCycle. Are you pitching the concept, the goal of raising money to eventually build out the first space that they'll get, then get customer reaction? Is it enough to get feedback on the concept of the company early on before fundraising?
Oh man, that's a tough one. So look, I think I'm going to abstract your question a little and caveat this with, like, I haven't done a physical location business. I have friends who have, but this is not my area of expertise. But if I were going back to, like, what are founders good for? They're good for giving you advice about how to start a company. What do I fall back on? I fall back on, how can you prove demand and interest in the thing that you are trying to build in the way that is leanest and easiest, right? If I was thinking about SoulCycle and I'm the founder of SoulCycle and I'm trying to prove out that people want to get together and bike in person, I don't need a physical location for that. I don't need a place that I rent and own. I'd probably start with, like, what's the cheapest, easiest way for me to get 10 people to fucking bike side by side? And then if I ask all 10 of those people to come back the next weekend, will they come again? And if I ask them to come a third weekend in a row, will they come again? And will they tell their friends, right? And how many people can I do it renting bikes or getting creative or bringing their own bikes or whatever, and then say, okay, wait a second, I am now at a point where I believe that I can fill this space each week, whatever. And then maybe you rent a space on just Saturdays and you figure out a way, like, and so that's the thinking, is like, how do I think about a lean way to justify it? Now, it all depends on how fast you're going to be able to prove that and what the wherewithal is. But there's a difference between vetting the idea and the demand for the solution and vetting the business mechanics. The business mechanics are, what is rent? How many square feet? How many employees? What's the marketing look like? What's the build out? What's et cetera, et cetera. You don't earn the right to get to that until you have something where you believe that, you know, what's the first line of your P&L? It's revenue. So you've got to be able to at least jump to the case of, I believe that I can get this many people in the room to do this thing. And the reason I believe that is I was able to get some people to do a thing. What we did when we started Carpool was we literally built a pilot and we invited like 30 people to try it out. And all we did was say, how many people can we get to Carpool 4 weeks in a row? And week 2 was bigger than week 1, and week 3 was bigger than week 2, and week 4 was bigger than week 3. And at the end, they all said they'd love to keep doing it, and they were happy with the program. That was it. And then we went to VCs and said, people want to do this thing. Give us more money. We'll get more people to do it.
Great. So this person's asking about finding co-founders. We have the Zoogla co-founder meetup, speed meeting sessions, online, also in-person ones in New York, as well as the Bay Area. But if you were someone trying to find a co-founder, how would you go about finding someone?
I would tell every single person I know that I'm looking for a co-founder. It's the best advice I can give you.
More tactical stuff, business bank, credit cards, any recommendations?
Let me see. SVB is the most founder-friendly bank out there. That's just my personal opinion. They're very close to us at Scoop. They've been very, very, very good to us. I would say one thing you'll never plan for, but like when shit hits the fan, you want a bank that wants to support you. And I think SVB is the most founder-friendly bank out there. And I'm happy to introduce you to our people there. Credit cards, there's like 100 now. I don't know. We like Airbase. People like Brex. I don't know. Go get the most points you can. Play them against each other. I don't know. I don't think it makes a difference.
What's a typical split of ownership for the co-founders? I mean, other than 50-50. If it's my idea, I'm looking for co-founder. Is it typical 60-40, 70-30? What process should they go through negotiating this?
Try to keep it at 50-50. There's no typical split that I know of. In anything that's between like 20-80 and 60-40 is just sort of ad hoc. I do know that like late to the party technical co-founders or other co-founders, I've mostly seen in like the 8 to 15 range. And then if we're talking about like founding engineer, that's probably when you're closer to like the 2.5 to 5 range. Like that's very anecdotal, but it seems to play out. It matches up our own experience. If you're not going to be 50-50, you should have a really good reason for it. Being 50-50 with my brother has been a tremendously positive thing in many difficult times. Yeah.
Is starting a company with 2 co-CEOs a bad idea generally?
Yes. To elaborate, like the thing that will slow down a company more than anything else is poor decision making, and ultimately you need a decision maker, like you need a CEO, right? That's just how it works.
How common is it to find success with a co-founder you don't know or haven't worked with before?
My understanding is it's very common. I mean, I think a lot of the companies out there have been successful with this. I don't think what I have found is it can often be loose relationships, right? Like, do I think it's typical that do I think the average case is like, hey, I'm looking for a co-founder, meet Joe. Okay, hey, Joe, you seem nice. Let's start a company. No. But I think that, I guess to make this sort of a weird logic puzzle, if you meet a person today and you get to know them a little bit and you talk every once in a while, and then 6 months from now, you decide that you're going to work together to start a company, is that someone you knew or that you didn't know? Well, it's someone that you know, right? And so the answer is like, you're just cultivating relationships, which is the reason why my advice here is like, just get out there and start searching, because you don't know what will happen at a given time. I hear a lot of stories, like the company here in Atlanta that I mentioned a few times, the guy who ended up being their CTO was just a local CTO at another company that they met, they got advice from. He was kind of an advisor. They talked about it on for a year and a half. And then finally, when I was like, you guys need to get a fucking CTO, they went and told him that. And they asked him if he knew anybody. He said, yeah, me, I'll do it. I'm interested. And they said, great, we know you. We've been working with you. We built a relationship. But they didn't know him a year and a half ago. So there's lots of different degrees of relationship building here. Yes, ideally, you can do it with someone who you've met or had a relationship in the past.
Great. Stock certificates, who do you use? There's a few different options.
Carta.
Great. What kind of MVP one can do when you're targeting large businesses, not consumer? You shared your example, but any other feedback for this?
I don't buy that you're working for large businesses only. Large businesses have the same problems as a lot of small businesses. If you are, to give you a better answer, if you are really trying to solve a problem that is inherent to scale of company, like this is a problem that happens when you are 10,000 employees or more, you need what's called a design partner. A design partner is a company where you say, hey, we want to build this thing to solve this problem for you. We're not really asking you to be a customer, but we want to kind of make it in the model that will solve your problem. And so what does that look like in sequence? Very similar to other things we've talked about. Go talk to a bunch of people, ask for feedback and input on a certain area to validate that your idea that you're solving for is a real problem. And then eventually say, hey, will you be my design partner? Like, can we work together over the next 6 months? Maybe, and maybe there's some agreement at the end that they put some money in or whatever. Usually not. Usually it's just risk on your part. But, in that case, you're trying to build out the model that you can get 20 of these really big companies. I would challenge you on that business model. I think trying to just whale hunt and just build solutions for super big companies is very risky. We can talk to you about that offline. But what you're talking about is a design partner. I've seen some folks do this in the hardware space, where they really need someone who can be hands-on in how they want to design a process or a solution for hardware, because there's just not that many hardware companies.
So Jon, how did you become such a great, fantastic public speaker? And how does that add to your success? Any tips for those?
It's very flattering.
Thanks for the great talk.
Look, I'll be honest. I've always been excited and comfortable talking in front of people. My father is a criminal defense lawyer, and so I just grew up in part of that gig is speaking in front of a jury all the time, and it's just sort of somewhat in my DNA and in how we grew up. I think this is age-old advice, but like if you want to become a better speaker, speak. Find opportunities to talk to people, and the problem here is most people who are uncomfortable doing public speaking don't do it. And so this is also the I'm bad at math problem, which is like, as a parent, I think about this is like, they say that like, one of the things you really, really want to avoid is ever letting your kid get to the point where they say, oh, I'm not good at math. I'm bad at math. Bad at math is a mental state, right? It may be taking more effort to learn it than the other person, but bad at math is a mental state. So saying I'm not a good public speaker is the same thing. So if you want to public speak, get up and do it. You're at a wedding, give a toast. You're at a birthday party, stand up and do it. Do Toastmasters, join a thing. Like find opportunities to be forced to be uncomfortable. And if you are psychologically uncomfortable, like it's here, then you need to then find help and have somebody talk to you about how to do it, right? Like if you haven't found, maybe to start to get to a culminating point here, like so much of this entire thing, this entire concept of being good at something or being a founder or learning how to be good at something is just fucking doing it. Like you have to try and put yourself out there and understand that there's not some person out there, there's not some class of human being that's excellent at everything off the bat a priori. They're just really good at learning how to do something new and being confident enough to realize that they might suck at it for a little while and then get better. And that applies to all the things that we've talked about.
So for those who are founders looking for feedback, Jon has previously offered his time to mentor founders. That's why I put his email here for one of the questions. But I think this could be a question that you want to share with everyone the answer to, Jon. How do you pitch your idea to a VC? He or she is stuck in the gold plating analysis paralysis loop where they feel they have only one chance to land the idea to a VC.
So start by pitching it to 10 not VCs, right? Like pitch me, send me an email and say, hey, I want to pitch you. Great, pitch me. I'll tell you if it's good or bad. And then I'll introduce you to another friend who can do the same thing. Or go email 10 Zoogers and be like, hey, let me go find 10 Zoogers who are smart. They don't have to know the VC, but start to understand the pattern. That's one. Two is do your research. Like there's lots of good literature out there on what makes a good VC pitch and how to formulate it, and what good decks look like, et cetera. And even 2 or 3 people can give you really good advice on like your deck sucks or not, it's helpful or not. Usually what you're optimizing for, if you're in that stage, is actually not what's going to matter as much. And then once you get more strategic, start by pitching, I'm going to be really blunt here, sorry, like start by pitching the shitty angels that you don't really want money from, then pitch the better angels that you think you might want some money from, then pitch your tier 3 VCs and your tier 2 VCs. After our A round, every time we fundraise since, the first 5 to 10 meetings were always with the VCs we didn't really want to fundraise from, because you need practice. And so you get the feedback, you see what's not good, you get some tweaks and so on. What I would say is your pitch quality is derived from your progress and idea quality. And so typically if you're having trouble with the analysis paralysis and like getting over the hump of pitching, there's something about your progress or what you've accomplished that maybe you don't even believe in or you don't know how to communicate yet, right? If I have 6 charts that all show progress, pitching, you can pitch it poorly and still be successful, right? It's, hey, look at this chart, look at this chart, look at this chart. If you're having a trouble figuring out how to tell the story, sometimes that's just because you don't have the oomph to back it up, or you just don't know how to, paint the vision, in which case you just need practice from people who are going to help you think about it.
So this is less about co-founding, but very relevant for the audience about looking for roles and opportunities. What's your perspective on consulting for an early stage startup as a means to try it out, whether it's a placeholder, a place or founder you want to work for as a full-time employee?
I think it's a good idea, generally speaking. I think there's a difference there between joining and being a founder. Like, I think it's a good idea. It's just, maybe that's the simplest thing. It's like it is a good idea to get familiar with people that you might want to work with and get more familiar with the business. Just know that there's some risk of the person not wanting you to do it.
So for HR and payroll benefits, Gusto versus JustWorks versus Rippling versus, what are the options?
We use JustWorks, we've used Gusto, we use Bamboo, we've used Sequoia. I hate all of them. I've never tried Rippling. I've heard it's all right. It really depends on size and stage and what you're optimizing for. The biggest thing I would try to figure out is like, how do you get size of company, and do you want a PEO, and what's your health insurance? Like, there's a lot of interesting pieces here. just ping me and we can talk about it. I mean, look, if I had to pick one of those, I'd pick Gusto because I believe they have a good team and a good product. I think they care about their users, but they're very limited in what they offer. But I've also heard Rippling is really good. So,
what matters more, novel idea or flawless execution?
flawless execution. Actually, can I be honest? Neither. Sorry, I'm going to push back on that question. Like, it's certainly not novel idea. Novel idea is how you get most lucky, but it's not going to be how you'll be successful. Flawless execution is not realistic either. Like you don't execute flawlessly. Literally what matters more is how fast can you learn. Like I cannot emphasize that enough. It's just like do something, learn, do something, learn, do something, learn. And so flawless execution in the sense of like how fast can you iterate to get to a better understanding of like what users really want.
Great. And then what are some key questions to ask potential users, customers to better uncover problems when exploring a startup idea?
Ask them to describe their own problems in their own words. And ask them to walk through in painful detail what they go through, right? So like, for example, we're doing research right now on how people use their phones to plan out the next day in the office if they're going in the office the next day, right? So you're a hybrid employee, you're supposed to go in the office the next day, and literally we're like, cool, it's 7 p.m. What are you doing? Where are you sitting? What are you pulling up on your phone? Do you check your calendar for the next day? Will you mess it? Like you need to literally, there's nothing more valuable than having someone spell out in excruciating detail every single thing that they do to accomplish a task or work through a situation, or to just open end and let them tell you about their problems, right? The number one mistake people make in user research is doing too much talking.
How did you price your services based on findings from the pilot?
Oh man, pricing is a beast. Well, let's take this offline. Pricing is one of the more difficult things that you'll ever do. There's pretty good literature. Lenny just interviewed somebody really good on this. I forgot her name, unfortunately. I mean, we've worked with pricing experts from McKinsey. My brother's ex-Bain. We've changed pricing models, I think, 8 times over the course of what we're doing. If there's one piece of advice I would give you, price it simple and don't be afraid to raise prices. That's it. Keep it simple. Complexity in pricing is a killer. And fear of increasing pricing is a killer.
So how can the Zoogla community help you, Jon? You're so helpful to us today.
I don't know. I don't need that much help. I'm happy to get involved and introduce people to whoever and give advice and give feedback. And yeah, I guess selfishly, like if you're working on something really cool and you're starting to figure out how to get things off the ground, like give me a look at it. We do some advising, I do some investing, and would love to help people more hands-on. Like obviously as part of the community, I'm happy to do whatever I can. But if you're doing something really cool, and something I said was helpful, then you can pay it forward by bringing me back in when it's something interesting.
Awesome. And then finally, you think about this community where everyone's at and launching companies. If you weren't doing your own startup, what other areas are super interesting right now that you would ask people to go explore, and maybe you may even invest in that startup idea?
It's a really good question. Some of this stuff's not practical, so I'll just throw it out there. I really wish I could. I would love to explore opportunity in education. I think the problem with education has real systematic impediments to successful business. If you look at education, most successful tech education companies are really just serving the needs of like people who already have, right? It's the wealthy, it's the well-educated, it's the higher end of society. And the problem is on the other end, most other economic models rely on public funding or public institutions, public schools. And that's a really hard business. So if you could find a way to create value for the masses in education, without necessarily being tied up in the slowness or the difficulty of the public education system, that's cool. I don't know how to do that. I think mental health is really interesting. I think it's going to be a massively exploding space for a long time. And I think that we've only begun to touch the tip of the iceberg here. I think early childhood intervention and support is a really interesting space. Mostly my wife's a speech therapist, but I know so many people who have speech, OT, PT, all these different services. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, from app developers to software to parent tools to things that help navigate that early stage of childcare. Those are all interesting. And then I think no, let's leave it at that. That's good.
So you've spent an hour and a half with us, Jon. This is super generous of you. Any final words? Did you not cover something you want to make sure you shared with our audience?
I mean, I've said a lot of words, so I think I probably covered most. We've lost a lot of folks who have had, but I appreciate the folks who are still here. I think final words are, I'm just one opinion, and so go get more. That's one. Two is the theme of all of this is like really just about diving in and being quick to learn as a company, quick to learn as a person, and really taking, my son is looking at me through our glass door, and really taking the initiative to get there. And the third is that this is a great forum to ask these questions, but my big push to everyone is just go ask people these things anyway. Go on your LinkedIn, reach out to people, reach out to strangers, put yourself out there. I would have done this as a one-on-one talk with basically anyone. And rarely do people actually ask for my time, right? And so go ask these questions out there and do your research, right? A lot of this stuff is great at perspective, there's great literature, and so always be looking to answer your own questions. I know it can be overwhelming, but just keep digging.
Thank you, Jon, for being so generous with your time, your advice to the Zoogle community today, but over the past few years. We'll let you go to your son. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. We have put a few people on live. So what you said is really impactful, Jon. See you soon.
Take it easy, everybody. Yeah, bye.